Hi everybody, thanks for tuning in today. My name is Corinne Ponsloth and I am the Communications Coordinator here at Light of Life on the development team. And as some of you may know, January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. And so in honor of that, we wanted to put together a panel of experts that are local here to discuss human trafficking and just give you guys kind of a knowledge base and some resources to learn more. And so just as an FYI for you guys, this discussion may be a trigger and it may contain some sensitive discussion topics, so just use discretion while listening and tuning in today. But how I'm going to start is I'm just going to let the panelists introduce themselves to you, and then we can kind of go from there. So Erica, would you like to start?
Sure. My name is Erica Chevalier. I am currently an advisor to the Justice team at Northway Christian Community. Do we tell you a little bit
you can
about
tell me
that?
about the organization.
So we started in 2012, and we are an organization, a ministry of Northway Christian Community, and we're rooted in prayer and the biblical call to justice, to seek justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. And we, our mission is to advocate on behalf of the vulnerable and the oppressed across our city, across the nation, and even to extended parts of the world. And we do this just in simple partnership with other organizations, some of which are here today, and many others, looking at this as a big and complex issue needing partnership.
Bonnie?
And I'm Bonnie, and I work with Living in Liberty. Living in Liberty fights against human trafficking in our city, and we do that with awareness. We do that with a safe home where we can help women come out of prostitution, and we are also on the street, which is the part that I do. I work with women on the street who are in commercial sexual exploitation.
Hi, my name is Leah Roberts, and I'm the Child Care Coordinator here at Light of Life Rescue Mission. And when it comes to human trafficking, I would describe myself as a concerned citizen. I found out about trafficking when I was a senior in high school, and then I proceeded to study it and be involved when I was in my undergraduate studies, and basically just came to realize how it's involved with so many other social issues, like addiction, like homelessness. So now it's my honor to be here at Light of Life and working with the kids and the moms, because even though it may not necessarily be a human trafficking situation, I see it as so connected when it comes to prevention, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit.
Thanks, ladies. So just to get started, I'm sure a lot of our viewers don't really know what human trafficking is. So if you could just talk a little bit about what it is and just the different types of human trafficking, I think that would be a good place to start. If anyone wants to jump in.
So I think we'd all agree that human trafficking is simply modern day slavery today. While slavery was officially and legally abolished in the late 1800s, 1865, I think. It's just resurfaced under another name.
And what are the different types? Can somebody elaborate just like on differences between like the types of human trafficking?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think that, first of all, when it comes to either of the types, there are two. There's sex and there's labor trafficking. But the three important components are when either force, fraud, or coercion is used to obtain some type of commercial sex act or some type of labor. So what that means is that someone could, modern day slavery, force, like someone could literally be like taken from their homes or taken off the street or something. But there are also situations of fraud where, for example, labor trafficking, that deals with industries. So that could happen in the restaurant industry, it could happen in a factory, it could happen in the agricultural industry. When someone is proposed with a job saying, oh, this is what your job will look like, you'll be getting paid this much money, we'll cover these services for you, etc. But then that ends up not being the case. People can be held against their will, people can be put into debt bondage where basically like they're in a financial situation that they can't escape because of building interest rates on the work that they are doing. So that's kind of what fraud can look like. And then there's also coercion. Coercion, another word for that could be manipulation. And so you could see that in something like sex trafficking. So sex trafficking involves commercial sex acts, so that could be prostitution, pornography, and so that would be when, let's say, for example, an older gentleman approaches a woman, a young woman, perhaps a teenager, at the mall or on the street, and starts talking to her how beautiful she is or something, and builds a relationship with her, and kind of builds her trust, and then exploits that trust by later selling her for sex. So that's kind of an example of how force, fraud, or coercion could play out in different situations like sex or labor trafficking. And I think it's really important for people to understand that both types of trafficking are really important. Both are prevalent throughout the world. Both are prevalent in Pittsburgh. Sometimes sex trafficking gets more of like the limelight, but both are really, really important, and both are not okay. I don't know if anyone.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too that under current laws too, that the force, fraud, and coercion that you mentioned doesn't have to be present for a situation with a minor.
Right.
So those three have to be, one of those three have to be present for those that are being exploited that are an adult. But a minor, those don't have to be present. Any exploitation is illegal because they're a minor.
Thank you. Okay, so I know you gave an example, Leah, but can you just talk a little bit about who can be a victim of human trafficking? A little bit about maybe the risk factors and the demographics, and just different things that we could look for, and what you see a lot of as far as like the victims in this sense.
As far as sex trafficking, the average age for entry would be around 12 years old. We usually talk about girls, but boys are also involved in this. It's a very young age when they are not able to know enough about their world to figure ways of getting out of the situation. They are often boyfriended. Someone older will come alongside and treat them as if they were a girlfriend to get their trust and get them to follow after them. It usually isn't a snatch case. Maybe they're online and meet someone that way, or just at the mall, and someone would approach them. They're looking for girls who are vulnerable, not the ones that have a lot of confidence, but the ones that look like they
And I think too, we've all talked about before how there is no one face of someone who's a victim of someone who's been trafficked. So some of the examples Bonnie gave, in addition, that some other arenas also might be those who are struggling under extreme poverty, who are looking for opportunities for a better life. So they're offered the illusion of a job somewhere, something that will help relieve that poverty. Others could be those that are struggling under addiction. So all these related issues that Leah mentioned earlier too. So these vulnerable, we're looking at these vulnerable populations of people, the girls who are maybe struggling with self-esteem or don't have just a strong family or safety kind of security net, someone that they can go to in these situations, make them at risk for being trafficked.
Thank you. And then could each of you, or any of you that have a story to share, could you just share a story and tell us a little bit about someone's experience that you've worked with and what their recovery process looked like, and then kind of where they are now, and what it took to get them to the point that they are now?
I do have lots of stories. And so many of those stories start out once upon a time, a little girl living in poverty. One little girl who lived in poverty was also abused sexually by someone that was living in the house, because oftentimes inner city homes, people are in and out because of a housing crisis, and they just take in whoever. So this little girl was sexually abused. A couple of years later, she ran away at a very young age, 12 years old. She pretty much was on the street. Her aunt took her in, and her aunt trafficked her. And she was, of course, sought after because of her age, and would go home, but then it would be detention and home and detention, and then run away again. That results in much trauma much trauma for the little girl. And getting over that is not easy. Even though she was rescued a couple of times, she went back to the situation. Actually with the person that abused her little girl being her trafficker. So she is doing the best that she can. Beautiful, beautiful qualities within her. She's working hard, but there's always that pool of the street, always the pool of the wildlife. But she's graduated from high school. That's a good thing.
That's awesome.
And I think that's really important to hit on, the impact that lifelong trauma can have on a person, just complex trauma and what that can do. Because oftentimes, you know, when people talk about human trafficking, they're like, oh, we're gonna go save all the victims and we're gonna run in and rescue them out of these situations. And it's really not that simple in a lot of cases, because there are those layers of trauma. And so it's not that, you know, it can seem really confusing and frustrating, like, well, why would they go back? But there are a lot of reasons why they would go back, reasons that a lot of people, it's hard to even understand. But it's just an important thing to hit on.
The first time that I heard layers of addiction, I had no idea what that was.
The layers.
There are layers. It's an addiction to be on the street because your brain gets so used to the craziness.
That's what you're used to. It seems strange, but that's their comfort. That's what they know. And if you think of, I mean, all humans, whenever we make a change in our life, even a positive change, it can feel kind of strange. You can get a little anxiety. It's, you know, we kind of go back to old habits, even though the newer habits are better. Yeah, I think it's just important to understand that sometimes we don't understand everything perfectly when it comes to other people's stories.
That's a good point.
Is there anybody else that wants to share a story? Just while we're
Yeah, there is a few gentlemen from Central America that came to the tri-state area here, pretty general, who under promises of having a different future than the life that they had where they were, promises for wealth and financial stability that they could then maybe at some point in time bring their families here to America. All false promises under an oppressor who truly was bringing them here for cheap labor, or actually not paying them anything for their labor. And so they leveraged a lot of the little that they did have in Central America, and came here to America. Their documents were all withheld by the person who brought them here. So they had no access to their passports, to any sort of identification. They did not speak the language here, English, and it just really had a difficult, extreme difficult situation that they were put in under this hand of a violent oppressor is what this person was, and used them for very cheap labor, did not treat them under any sort of human standard rights, things that they should have had under our laws here that they did not know they were privy to. And so long story short, they were able to be extracted from that situation, and were able to start on that journey of recovery and finding freedom here. We're able to apply for what's called a T visa, where they could apply to our local government, to the federal government, to see if they could actually stay here as a victim. And so their story, while there's some great success to the end of it, of being able to actually acquire that T visa, actually reside in the United States, and eventually bring their family over several years later. Their family was able to join them here. When you talk about the trauma and the level of trauma that they lived in day in, day out for that significant period of time before their extraction, it's not something that can be overlooked as a success story at the end. Thankfully, by God's grace, they were able to find freedom. But there's a lot that goes into it beyond just the extraction, and I don't know if we're talking about more about that, but about the trauma and what they had to walk through. And these are men with names and wives and children who have stories and lives to live, and that was taken from them by the violent hand of another person.
I think what's interesting, Erica, what you're saying is like, what I picked up from that was that they didn't even know the laws that and like what they were and weren't, like their rights basically here in America. So that's really interesting that like coming from another country and just being in that situation, like they don't even understand that that's not okay.
Right.
You know, so
Right.
that's
And we could
interesting.
talk about the face of the trafficker. That can look very different
Yeah.
too, but they were held under threats of violence against their family back in their home country. So, you know, all these questions that we sometimes get, why don't they run away? Why don't they
Yeah.
find their own freedom? There's a lot of manipulation and coercion and fraud, all the things that Leah mentioned early on that take place that make it a very complex situation.
And you mentioned the trafficker, and so that was my next question: is there a common profile for a trafficker? And if so, what does that look like? Or could it really be very general? Could it be anybody?
That's a good question. I think in similar to how there's not necessarily like a common profile for a victim, there's really not a common profile for a trafficker. They could be people from all walks of life, all upbringings. Most of them, I would argue, are pretty smart because they're able to, you know, do trafficking with sometimes a number of victims. Sometimes it's with the whole pool. Sometimes it can cross borders. Sometimes it's just in one place. But I think it's also really important to remember that there are the manipulative abilities of a trafficker, and sometimes there can be crossovers, like when we're talking about addiction. A trafficker could be the drug dealer. I'll never forget, I had a conversation with a woman. She was in her 50s or 60s at the time. It was at an outreach center when I was living in Michigan, and she started being sold by her mother to the drug dealer when she was about 5. So it's situations like that where there's the drug dealer, trafficker, but then that's also the parent who's acting as a trafficker too. And that's kind of like that it makes my heart stop every time I think of it, a parent and trafficker being in the same sentence. But that happens as well, and I think that's where it goes to show that, I mean, it could be anybody. It's not going to be like the strange-looking guy down the street. I mean, maybe, but these things are often hidden in plain sight.
Yes, in Pittsburgh, we are finding more mothers and daughters.
That's not something that you think about, you know,
No.
generally.
It's not something that you want to think about.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's just like a crazy realization, like what you just said. I was like, wow, I can't believe that happens. So, is there anything that is being done, or what is being done to the perpetrators, and then also like the consumers, the people who are buying these people? Like, what are some of the things that are happening to them, or like how is that being dealt with?
Demand, 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 that's what we all want to talk about. Because if there were no demand, this would not be happening. The demand comes from unbelievably everywhere. And it's not, that's the part that we would really want, that there would be more deterrent to the demand end of it.
Thank you. And then where are some of the places that trafficking tends to happen? Are there certain locations like hotels, or I know you mentioned mall a couple of times, like different public areas like that? Is that generally where the trafficking takes place?
The trafficking, I've read recently, happens now. Instead of having like a brothel, you would think of a brothel in another country, and there are brothels and there are massage parlors. There are also just quick a sleazy motel where you can stay there just for a few days, so then move to somewhere else. So it happens on the street. I see it on the street.
On the street, in
Of
people's
Pittsburgh.
in people's homes. You mentioned massage parlors. I think of myself, and I know human trafficking is happening, but I remember like in 2017 there was a massage parlor that was raided in Squirrel Hill where trafficking was happening, and I was shocked. Like I drove by that hundreds of times, you know, and so and then I was even more shocked because like, yeah, you should know this would be happening. But but it is. It's, again, the plain sight thing. Massage parlors, businesses, storefronts, a lot of different places.
And I think pulling into the labor trafficking side too, because we do, when we think of trafficking, we think sex trafficking, and I feel like it's more in media these days than the labor trafficking, but labor trafficking, again, is also happening here in the Western Pennsylvania tri-state area. And so when we're looking at that, we're looking at possible, and obviously these are just risk factors, doesn't
Right.
mean that all of these places have this going on, but we're looking at, agricultural farms that are producing lots of product. Obviously, they want to produce their product at the cheapest cost that they can to make the highest profit they can. So we're looking at agricultural farms. We're looking at restaurants, potentially. We're looking at cleaning companies more recently. Anytime you have a third-party employer, it's not a direct employee of the company. There's a little bit of space there where sometimes employers, business owners don't really know who's working for that third-party cleaning company that's coming in and cleaning their stores or their businesses. So looking at some of those, same with motel, hotel cleaning services. So again, these are all just risk factors. Doesn't mean that they're happening. But I think it is important as we're out and about in our communities, as law enforcement has continued to encourage all of us to keep our eyes open, look at things through a different lens. Sometimes you get that gut feeling like something's off here. And so we'll be able to equip you with ways to report that and resources.
So I know, Bonnie, you mentioned earlier, I think it was, about just technology and social media. And so how does the internet and social media influence trafficking? And what, I guess, should we be looking for, but also what should we be looking for our children, and just monitoring for them when it comes to the internet and to social media in this sense?
Well, I guess we could start with pornography. That feeds all of this as far as this sexual
The demand.
yes, is pornography. And a child could get it with one little click on their phone. I am very happy I didn't have to deal with that when my children were growing up, but you have to deal with it. You have to get hold of those phones and know what your children are doing and train them and what they can what can happen to them. And like I said, they're not usually snatched away. It's usually a lure through some site that the child has.
Yeah, it's that lure, that online, they would use the word grooming, but just that continual conversation with someone that they think they're talking to, but they may not really know who that other person is, or that other person is pretending to be somebody else. But I think some of the more practical pieces of this is for sure as a parent knowing your child's passwords to their social media accounts, monitoring those accounts, even just from a high level of, do you know all these people that are following you? Having good conversations with other parents about what they're doing and collaborating, doing your homework on different apps before maybe approving them, especially for younger children, knowing what the risks are in these. Social media is a beautiful thing when used correctly, but it's also can be a high risk thing for children if parents are not properly keeping track of that.
Do you have anything to add, Leah?
No, I think they did a great job.
Good. So then just tying it back to the societal challenges, I know we hit on it a couple of times, but how does this connect with homelessness and addiction and poverty? And then also giving that connection, what are the implications for the size of this problem in Pittsburgh especially?
When we first wanted to be a force against trafficking, we had absolutely, we just didn't know how big a part addiction was going to play in that. And often you have to deal with the addiction before you can deal with the trafficking. And I'm talking about addiction to drugs. And that is not going to go away anytime soon because the drugs are changing. What used to be cocaine and heroin, we're now adding fentanyl to it. And what is coming our way is crystal meth. And believe it or not, that addiction, I understand, I have been told, is even greater than heroin. The addiction is tremendously difficult to get out. So if the addiction then needs to be fed, you need money once you're addicted. And oftentimes the girls that I see on our street are there because they have to feed their addiction. And they are in prostitution because of that. There's always a background, there's always a reason that they got there, but the addiction is a huge part of it. And we are losing moms in our community. We are losing resources. Every woman that I meet on the street is a beautiful person. The image of God is there. I can always see their strengths, and it's just tied up because of the addiction. But our communities need our women back. Children need their moms back. We need to work to have that happen.
Anybody else have anything to add?
I think Bonnie did a great job at definitely tying in the connections with addiction and with trafficking, and that can, I mean, it can look a lot of different ways. Like you were saying, some people can be, maybe they're trafficked as a child, and then they develop that addiction, and then later on in life, you know, if they're 30 and if they're selling themselves on the street, legal definition, that's not human trafficking, but trafficking was a part of that story. And I think that's really important to remember. And then also just the ways that drugs can be used within the trafficking process. So some people could be using drugs to cope just with the stress and the trauma that they're experiencing. Drugs can be used intentionally by the trafficker because people are easier to manipulate if they need something that you have. So you can see that a lot in the force, fraud, and coercion piece. And then even like you were saying with homelessness, it's homelessness, it's addiction, it's people coming from families where quite simply they perhaps have not experienced love, and so they're searching for something. And so something that I definitely learned throughout the years is how it's not just human trafficking. That can seem like the big head honcho news header, but it is connected to so many other intricate things in our society, and it's a huge complex problem, which means that it's probably a huge complex solution that involves a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of organizations, a lot of community members, which can seem hopeless, but for me it's hopeful because especially living in a city like Pittsburgh, where there are a lot of great agencies and organizations and churches and community members who are doing great work.
Yes, another issue is abortion. This really feeds the abortion industry because so many of the women do have multiple abortions, are made to.
So I know Leah mentioned, like you mentioned the solution that it's going to take, but can you, any of you, dive into what resources are needed and what is needed when rescuing someone from a situation like this, or when like helping them out of that? Like what are just some of like the basic things that organizations like yours really need in order to do that?
We need prayer, we need intercessors. This is demonic. When you look at the situation, how difficult it is, we need to intercede, and God will give His people answers.
Good, thank you.
I think partnership is as I look around this panel, there are so many who can be represented here, and it really is going to take partnership across the city. It's going to take partnership with our friends in law enforcement. It's going to take partnership with social service agencies. It's going to take partnership with faith-based organizations and churches. It really takes us all coming around the table to say, how can we continue to create awareness and education on this? And then also, as people are identified, how can we come alongside them and help them begin to take those steps in this journey of freedom? That's not like an instant thing that happens overnight or even over decades. I've heard Bonnie say over and over, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And it's so true. And so it really does take all of us working together to say, how can we come alongside with resources? How can we come alongside with services that they need to be able to come alongside with prayer, and all of these pieces together, I think, is our best hope at seeing this kind of turn the tide.
Yes,
And I'm thankful for partnership, like across
Oh,
Pittsburgh,
yeah.
it really is happening,
Mhm.
and that is the hope-filled piece.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I know Light of Life has addiction recovery programs and life recovery programs, and so you can get involved with us by volunteering or donating, but can you guys speak to other ways that people could maybe get involved in helping fight this cause and be resource or be used as a resource in that? Are there any other ways that you can think of?
Whatever gift you have, Living in Liberty can use you. And you can look us up online, and you can come to one of our trainings. You can let us know online that you'd be interested, and we will find a place for you.
Great. And the Justice team at Northway Christian Community also host quarterly meetings. Oftentimes we'll partner with Living in Liberty and do like a meal build out for the women at the drop-in centers. And then we also have educational pieces that our director leads and are phenomenal about what's happening locally here as far as not only the laws, but what are some of the cases that have been in the news recently, and just helping to equip people with information so that they can share with people and continue the awareness. Really, it's using your platform, whatever influence you have. If you're a student and watching this and you love social media, you know, there are many ways you can post things out there to get awareness from all the way up through young moms getting involved and men getting involved.
Yeah, and so we'll be posting a list of resources for you to get involved, and then also just ways if you need help in you're stuck in a situation like this, we'll have resources available for you for that too. But is there anything else, ladies, that you want to add before we kind of close out the panel today?
I would just want to thank everyone who's watching today. Thank you for being concerned. Thank you for being willing to talk about a tough topic and to learn more. And thank you for considering getting involved, even in some small way, in the community, because it really does make a difference.
When I was first introduced to street outreach, it was through a church in St. Louis. And when I saw the women on the street, my heart was really very touched. And they had a banquet, and one young girl stood up to give her testimony. And I will never forget it. She was so embarrassed, so afraid, so scared that she actually put her arms up above her head and was just kind of like a little girl. But what she said was, this program, and they were teaching her a trade, this program has helped me to become the woman God created me to be. And when she said that, I understood the glory of God. That is the glory of God. And isn't that what we all want to see and be a part of? Is seeing girls rescued, their lives restored, and being the women that God created them to be.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, so we'll have resources, like I said, available for you on our Facebook and Instagram pages. And then if you have any questions about anything, you can feel free to direct message us here or visit any of the websites and resources that we post. But thanks so much for tuning in today. We hope you learned a little bit more, and have a great rest of your afternoon.